Yes. Peace and greetings, people from around the world. This is Aura the Informationalist, and you are now tuned in to the Network of Awareness podcast radio show. I just want to welcome you to today's episode 77 of season 4. It's called Hurt People, Hurt People. And in today's show, we are going to bring awareness to certain traumas that we may have experienced when we were young and that are still relevant in our lives today. Why do I bring up the relevance of it? Because many of us are still suffering from childhood trauma. And sometimes as we get older, when we don't deal with those traumas accordingly, meaning getting the proper counseling and healing from the trauma and the pain and the suffering that we went through, that carries on into adulthood. And I want to bring some awareness to that today because I've realized that within myself when it comes to early childhood trauma and how significant of an impact it's had on my personal relationships, on my business life throughout the years, and overall my psyche when it comes to how I operate within modern day society here. And I think this is an important topic. And as many of you know, here in the Network of Awareness, we discuss a lot of different topics that are in regards to social sciences, society, and culture. And something that I focus on a lot since I started this network and this podcast is that I focus a lot on mental health, because I think mental health is something that has become somewhat taboo. So I want to welcome you to discussing these important issues when it comes to mental health. And I think it's important that we are aware of who we are or what we are and what we've become based upon our past, so that we can have a better present and be fully aware of what's really going on in our minds, which plays out in our lives. So I want to welcome you to episode 77, Hurt People, Hurt People.
Nothing like stage, screen, radio,
Please just tell me what's happening to me in plain English without the mumbo jumbo.
You are now tuned in to the Network of Awareness.
So, people, when it comes to childhood trauma, many of us go through severe trauma when we are children. Some of us go through some mild trauma that's not as severe as, let's say, sexual abuse, physical abuse, or intense emotional abuse. And the reality is that all of the abuses are very traumatic. But believe it or not, that saying that sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is so far from the truth, isn't it, people? And for those of you that are listening to this episode, I would definitely like to get some feedback. So if you can put a review on any of the platforms you listen, or go to networkofawareness.com and you can leave me questions and also leave reviews for each particular episode that you like or want to comment on. And if you want to reach me directly, you can reach me at Aura, ORRA, at networkofawareness.com. So people, when it comes to words, they do hurt. And see, that's where the emotional trauma is very significant in how it impacts a child's life. And I can tell you that I've never experienced as a child any type of sexual abuse, like many people that I've come to know have. And what I've noticed is that when it comes to sexual abuse, a lot of times that trauma continues on until the child turns into adult. And psychologically, a lot of times, that child that's now an adult that has gone through sexual abuse can become sexually hypersexual, can become somewhat bipolar to a certain degree, where their mood swings are very up and down. They become very self-destructive. A big thing is a lot of people that go through sexual abuse, they wind up cutting themselves, and doing self-mutilation. The same thing goes for people that have been severely physically abused, where a parent or a guardian of theirs is constantly whooping them and hurting them and beating them down, sometimes unconscious, sometimes with certain appliances, whether it be pots or pans or belts or whips or whatever the abuser can get their hands on. And these abuses and traumatic experiences that many of us have experienced as children start to seep into our adult lives little by little, because we never did the proper work to heal from it. And that happens with many of us, because how are we supposed to know that we are supposed to heal from this, that we are supposed to seek counseling? Many of us don't even have those options or even have the proper education in knowing that we are suffering from trauma, because many times, even with the sexual abuse, believe it or not, many times as children, we think it's normal and we normalize these things. That's why a lot of times our abusers get away with their wicked deeds, at least physically, when it comes to the court systems and the institutions of society. I truly believe that those people will suffer spiritually based on their deeds, because of the energy they put out and the karma that brings, whether that karma comes swiftly or doesn't even come until they transition. But that's just my personal belief. When it comes to emotional trauma, that's something I have experienced as a child. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Did I get my butt whooped a lot by my mother? Yeah, to some degree I did. I wouldn't consider it physical abuse, because it definitely wasn't. But let's just say that there were times where I got hit and I deserved to get hit. Because, sometimes I did things as a child that was very bad. I remember one time we were playing with fire, me and a couple of children from the neighborhood, and we started throwing these papers down the shaft, and everything started catching fire in this dirty shaft. And it was right by some type of gas for this building. Now, if that thing would have went off, I would have wound up blowing up the building. And what was interesting is that we tried to turn it out with quarter waters. If you don't know what quarter waters is, these juice waters that are filled with artificial flavoring. They would come in grape, orange, cherry, strawberry, and I believe lemon. And they look like little grenade, containers. It's cool. It had the silver covering that you poke your finger in and you drink it. It was called quarter water, because they cost 25 cents when we were growing up. And we bought a bunch of them, and it was turning out some of the fire, but it just kept roaring. And then, of course, there was a deli that was connected to that building named Don's Meat Market out in the Bronx. For some of you that may know that, out in Castle Hill. And, the owner's son came out and poured a bunch of water down there and got it to stop. And of course, because, they knew who my mother was, I was blamed for it, even though there were other kids involved. I was kind of like, I guess, pegged as the ringleader of this. And in actuality, I don't remember if I was, but I know that I was egged on. So, either way, it was my fault. And luckily, nobody got hurt. And I remember just my mother just giving me a whipping that definitely sent me to bed crying. for a while. And I felt very much, you know, in pain, but I dried up my tears and kept it moving. Now, there's some kids that experience those types of beatings like I got when they do nothing wrong. A lot of times, they can be growing up in a single parent household. And it can be a situation where, let's just say it's a single mother and she's raising her son. That son can look a lot like the father, act like the father. And if that woman has any strife and resentment and discontentment and hatred towards the parent, that whether it abandoned them, whether they broke up, the fact that that child looks like the father, acts like the father, a lot of times the woman will take that anger out on their child, and vice versa. Same thing with the father. If the daughter looks like the mother, or even if the son looks like the mother, it could be a lot of triggers. They can trigger the abuser to want to abuse physically and sometimes sexually. And sometimes it's always somebody that you know or somebody that befriends you with sexual predators as children. So the trauma is not only in the actual sexual abuse, but it's the actual psychological warfare that goes on by the abuser before the actual attack is initiated. And that develops a lot of trust issue amongst children and, of course, when they become adults. And it's a huge problem because when it comes to pedophilia and the amount of pedophilia that circulates throughout the world, it's really depressing because it's such a common practice, believe it or not. But it's so taboo that nobody wants to talk about it. And many times, when children try to come forth with such abuses, a lot of times the family disregards it or brushes it to the side or sweeps it under the rug, so to speak. And then that child feels like they have nowhere to turn. And they feel like they've been abandoned. And that's where the abandonment issues and the codependency issues start to play. And I could tell you that I had codependency issues as a young man. And one of the ways that I would show it is that I always felt like I had to prove myself to people, to prove my worthiness as a young man and prove my worthiness in the relationships I was establishing, primarily relationships that were established through other young men that I was building friendships with. So if I would say like, hey, you're my boy and you're my people's, I was going to try to do everything to prove to you that I was worth being your brother, worth being your boy. And then the same thing in relationships where I noticed that because of that proof of worthiness, I became somewhat of a hopeless romantic in a lot of relationships where I did a lot when it came to showing affection and gifts and showing love in certain ways or writing poetry and just being very romantic, but being very excessive with it very quickly. And it took me time to realize these things. And even to this day, when it comes to some of these things, when building relationships with women, I still try to figure out what is the proper balance and what is the proper approach and pace in which to establish a relationship. And it's one of the reasons why, even though I was very fortunate with the relationship that I was recently in, that I decided that I was married to this woman, which we never got married legally through the court systems, which I would never do anyway. But being married under the spirit of the Most High being the foundation. Now, obviously, as many of you know, based on my history with this woman, I was never really married to her. So I can't even really call her my ex-wife because the foundation wasn't even real. The foundation was built on a lie because she wasn't operating according to the Most High's principles. And obviously, I learned that sooner than later through the Most High in order to disengage and completely take myself out of that situation, block her from having contact with me, and then, as I'm doing now, continue to live my life and really just move forward with understanding that that experience doesn't really define me at all, and that that experience happened to me because I am a human being. And no matter how trusting you may be of a person, sometimes these people are there to teach you a lesson. And I learned a lot of lessons, and I give all the praises to the Most High for that. But now I can see how a lot of my childhood trauma with abandonment, with neglect, is one of the reasons why I didn't nip a lot of things in the bud and set up proper boundaries when establishing that relationship and other relationships as well, with just people that I've gotten to know throughout the years, which some of them are no longer in my life for good reasons, because when there are really extreme pressure moments, it's the people that stick around, and it's the people that actually step up in times of pressure moments and really show you how much they care about you and how much they appreciate you based on those times, because they're there for you. And then you'll start to notice that a lot of times, the ones that you think are going to step up, step away. And those are the ones you have to let go immediately. And then there's those that you think are not going to step up, and they rise to the occasion every single time. And then that's how you get to know who's really with you and who's really not with you. But you see, let me tell you a quick story about myself and how a lot of these abandonment issues that have so slowly progressed as a child and that I carried with me as an adult, and that I'm still learning from and healing from and coping with to become a better human being, so that I don't have these attachments of abandonment. See, when I was growing up, my mother and father pretty much separated when I was turning 5 years old. I was 4 years old. And I still remember it to this day. I remember my mother leaving my father. And I remember one day literally having a moving truck come and pick me, my brother, my sister up, and my mom, and literally move into another man's house, which was my stepfather, who became my stepfather. And I remember the trauma of just that experience alone. And I remember the heartache that my father had. But understanding the history between my mother and father, that was probably, I wouldn't say the best decision my mother made, because in the way that she did it, it obviously was wrong. I always felt like if my mom was going to leave my father, she had to do it by herself. But like a lot of women in those years, and we're talking, early 80s, and a lot of women just naturally always feel like they need to be with a man in order to be whole. And that is true. But the way they go about it is sometimes, or should I say most of the time, very unhealthy. And like what my mother did was bring her children into another man's home, cold turkey. Why? Because that man has stability. My father didn't. My father was a gambler, a drug dealer, and obviously was committing adultery. So my mother felt comfortable to commit adultery back. And of course, that creates a toxic relationship. But then as I grew up with this man who, was a mailman and studied psychology, got a degree in psychology, there was a lot of psychological warfare early on in my life where I used to get put down a lot. And then my mother, subconsciously, based upon her upbringing, my mother had narcissistic behavior as well, in somewhat gaslighting me, in the sense where I received a lot of criticism as a child, where when it came to criticism, that's where my attention lied. But when it came to emotional support, it wasn't there. And then I wound up seeking emotional support from outside resources like my friends. And I remember that because a lot of my friends, and one of my best friends to this day, his name is Orlando, that lives actually out here in Florida as well. And he has an animal sanctuary that he runs. He's very busy. But me and him grew up under similar conditions at the same time. And we were literally born a day apart. So I was born on the 17th. And he was born on the 18th in the same year. And we always have this friendship where even if we don't see each other for long periods of time, which has been like that for the past, I would say, 5 years or the past 10 years, where our relationship is we see each other, our families are interconnected, but we don't see each other like that. And if anything, we talk on the phone, but that friendship is still strong. It's like, that's my brother, for life. And I know that. Like, there's no ifs, ands, buts about it. And of course, he's one of those friends that never did anything to truly hurt me or to deceive me or to betray me. Did we have little bickerings and misunderstandings? Absolutely. But nothing to the extreme where I had to say, you know what, this person is no good for me in my life. But in our upbringing, a lot of time we spent sleeping over each other's houses. And primarily, I would sleep over his house more than he would sleep over my house. And that was because my mother, once she got into that marriage, my stepfather really didn't want me around. And I think that's part of the reason why my older brother and sister wound up moving with my father. They didn't really stick around too long. They literally stuck around for a couple of months. The next thing you know, they're living with my father in Florida. And that really hindered my relationship with my siblings because I didn't really have an upbringing with them that was very consistent. It was very fractured. And that in itself hindered me psychologically because I had no stability emotionally. And then my mom would literally leave me with friends and family. And one of the reasons why I developed such a close relationship with my aunts and my uncles on my father's side that still lived in New York at the time, and some of them still do. Or one of my uncles lived in New Jersey and New Brunswick to this day. He's been there for years. But I had another uncle that still to this day lives in the Bronx. And then I have an aunt that also lives out there. So I really developed a lot of strong relationships with my aunt and my uncles and my cousins, their siblings, or their children, I mean. Because we have a lot of memories getting together during Thanksgiving, getting together for the Christmas holidays, getting together when my mother, let's say, wanted to go out or had plans to go to Atlantic City with my stepfather for the weekend. I was staying at somebody's house. I even stayed with my mother's niece, which is my cousin, who is a lot older than me. And I stayed with her and her husband for 2 weeks at one time when my mother went to go live the Viva Loca. And I have all these memories to help me realize that, hey, I never really had any emotional support growing up. And that's why when I would do things in school, like play tennis, which I was really good at, I was a track star. I was somebody who played basketball from like the 7th grade to 8th grade for a Catholic school that I got put into after coming out of public school. And that was another thing where I had no stability. I literally was going from school to school. I stayed in the same public school system from kindergarten to 6th grade. That was the friendships that I developed, public school. And the public schools that I went to were rough, right? Because everybody, for the most part, was like 60 or 75% from the projects. And then the rest of us were from the housing that was just around the projects, on the outskirts of it, And you were considered upper class if you lived in a private house right outside the projects, which I thought was insane. It's like, okay, I get it, because the projects is a whole different environment. But it's just interesting how I would be in the projects a lot because a lot of my family was in the projects. So when my mother would want to leave me, she would leave me with either my family or my stepfather's extended family or his immediate family, like his sisters and brothers and things like that, or and his mother, who was my godmother. So I got to spend a lot of time in the project. And I got into some fights. I got bullied. A bunch of things happened as a kid that I got to see and experience. So I never felt like I had a real connection with my mom. And because of that, it led me to these abandonment issues. It led me to having some major insecurities by the time I was a teenager. And that's what led me down a path, like many of you know, where I started selling drugs and then got set up to get killed by one of my closest friends. And then that took me on a trajectory to where now, not only did I have these abandonment issues, not only did I start to develop codependency issues, not only did I start turning to drugs like marijuana and alcohol, but I also stopped caring. I started to become somewhat desensitized. And even though I still had a lot of empathy to give, and I still had a lot of compassion, and I still had a lot of passion for life, it was becoming very fragmented and decompartmentalized. And I hope that this message is reaching out to some of you because what I'm starting to realize in my mid 40s is that because of that upbringing, I have been as a grown man for a couple of decades now, I've been poor at setting boundaries. So now I feel like the Most High is giving me a whole new life through the Messiah and through the teachings of the scriptures, as well as other teachings of just universal truth that the Most High gives through people and through things and through books and through just our experiences, that I'm learning that when it comes to having peace of mind, which is really the peace in spirit, there's certain principles that you have to follow in order to maintain that level of oneness with peace and at a high level. And a lot of it comes from not only just repentance, but great humility and having discipline to be humble. Because being humble people in today's times is a superpower. Because that superpower will keep you safe, will keep you respected, and it will keep you with healthy admiration from people. And it'll also help you to avoid into getting to toxic situations that can have major consequences, sometimes even life and death consequences. And it could be something as simple as going to the corner bodega and having one of the guys that chill on the block say some, nasty things to you and get you to trigger your ego and your pride to be like, what you said? And next thing you know, you're in an altercation and somebody loses their life. It's really that simple. Why? Because as I said it before, and I'll say it again, and I say it until I'm long gone, is that this is all spiritual warfare. And there are principalities and forces of darkness that are working overtime against us. Just as there are benevolent high forces spiritually that are working for us. A lot of times, though, we're not listening. A lot of times when our ears are ringing, we're not listening. We're not tapping into that frequency that is really trying to teach us something or make us aware of something or warn us of a decision that we're going to make that might not be in our best interest. And this is why it's so important for repentance, because repentance is what's going to lead you to that self-examination to really understand what it is that you're experiencing. Because if not, then you're just like how Morpheus told Neo that all these people that are in the Matrix, they are just going with the flow. They're just programmed to go with the flow. And what that really means is that they don't know who they truly are, but they think that they're having meaningful experiences because they're living life, they're making money, they have a car, they have a house, they have relationships. Some of them have more than one relationship. I mean, there's so many worldly things that make us think that we're actually living, but we never really got to truly discover who we are. And a lot of us are fractured to the core because of childhood trauma. And with my situation, people, going through these experiences of abandonment, being raised with a stepsister that got me into doing certain things that I may have not done if she wasn't around. And what I mean by that is like my growing up with my stepsister, who was a few years older than me, she was the first one that got me to kiss a girl at 11 years old. It was one of the most nervous things that I've ever experienced. Now, was it super exhilarating after it was all done? Yeah, it was. And for some reason, I always attracted older women in my life, even as a young kid. I mean, it's been part of my, even though my last relationship, her and I were just a year apart, I dated a lot of women close to my age, seriously. But growing up, I had a lot of flings with older women, and I had a couple of relationships with older women too. But I had way more, what I call flings, where it's like, it's not really a relationship, but it does last for a significant amount of time. And I think it's because of my childhood. And I just remember that, having my first kiss, losing my virginity at the age of 17. All of these things were very traumatic, believe it or not, very significant, very impactful. And nobody taught me how to cultivate a relationship with a woman. My stepfather was there to criticize me and always trying to get me out of the house. Always trying to figure out a way like, hey, he always would suggest about getting me into boarding school. Then he started suggesting that I get into the Navy, into the military. And I gotta tell you people, I'm not saying that if I went into the military, that it would have been a bad thing, but I'm very grateful that I didn't take that route, because at one point in my life, when I was about 12 years old, up until about 15 years old, that was something that was going to be a reality for me, because I was dead set on doing that. And I really wanted to become a Navy SEAL. But as I started to see my stepfather, who was in the military, and he was in the Vietnam War for 4 years, I saw the toll that took on him spiritually. And that was one of the main reasons why I didn't want to go into the military, because I said to myself, I don't want to get fractured like this man for nothing. I don't want to fight for a country that's really not going to support me when it's all said and done. And I saw that with my stepfather. I saw that with a lot of veterans from the VA hospital and people that he was friends with, and these grown men that were literally shells of themselves based on something that happened 20 years ago. And a lot of them would turn to alcohol and drugs in order to cope with the pain that they didn't heal from. That's why mental health, people, is so important. That's why with the pandemic right now, mental health has been a very, very important thing, but it's not talked about enough. And we're not trying to tackle it enough. Now, there's a lot of people doing the good work, but we need more of that. We need more awareness around mental health, because if not, we're going to continue into a cycle where it's just going to be a process of hurt people hurting people, because that's what they do. A lot of times when we go through these issues with our parents, with people, with friendships, with family members, it's all because of unresolved trauma that the person hasn't healed from. And a lot of relationship dynamics are like that. And usually the relationships that do work out and are fulfilling are the ones where the people either didn't have those traumatic experiences to cause some form of codependency, or some form of abandonment issues, or some form of trust issues based on abuses. A lot of times, if a lot of times the people that do have those fulfilling relationships, because they have gotten the counseling, they have put in the work. There are people that have gone through severe sexual trauma as a child and can have fulfilling relationships with their prospective spouses. It's not an uncommon thing, people, but it's those that do the work. Excuse me, folk. I can also tell you, too, that putting in the work is probably one of the most important things that you can do. But that's another, I don't know if you want to call it a misnomer or a fraudulent concept that's put out there where it's like, oh, if you're getting therapy, there's something wrong with you, you're crazy and all that. No, people, we're all a little crazy because we're all suffering from some unresolved issues, many of us. That's why back in 2020, when I was reading an article back in 2017 from the Medical Association stating that 90% of Americans, this was in 2007, are suffering from some form of depression. And I was like, you know what? That makes so much sense because many of us go through depression and we don't even realize that we're depressed. And there's a lot of people out there like that, especially with the younger folks. A lot of them are dealing with opioids and all of this pharmaceutical nonsense. And the pharmaceutical industry has produced a whole generation about this. And I'm going to discuss this on my TV show if you want to learn about it, because I'm going to cover a documentary on my TV show called Rap Star. That's on, I think it's on Hulu or Prime. But I'm going to cover, I'm going to take certain clips from my show or from that documentary and break it down because the pharmaceutical industry has had or is having a heavy influence on the music industry and on the culture of our young children and how they gravitate to these other children that all they talk about is depression. And they talk about how messed up their life is. But it's almost like a badge of honor now, where the more depressed you are, the more cooler you are. You know, so that's why you have a lot of kids practicing self-mutilation. You've had people on my show talk about practicing self-mutilation because I've had younger folks that have come onto this show talking about that. You know, I even had my child practicing that behavior because she went through some trauma living with her mother and her stepfather. Now, how severe my daughter's trauma is, I don't know, because even in that situation, I was kept in the dark. The good thing is that my daughter's now older and now she's getting the proper help, but it's going to take a long time. Like, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. And I only can hope that with my newfound experiences and how I'm growing from it, especially through the word of the Most High, that I can impress upon my daughter to seek the word for herself as well and not necessarily force it on her like I've tried to do in the past. And that's probably one of the reasons why it didn't really sink in, let alone the fact that there wasn't enough time to stay with her on a consistent basis for these principles that were being taught to her to sink in and to become part of her. But when you live in the present, there's always an opportunity for a new beginning, people. I truly believe that. I know it to the core. It's one of the reasons why I can get on this microphone and tell you that right now, I am content with life. There are certain things that I need to improve on in aspects of my life, but I'm so grateful for the life that I have that I can continue to ascend into a higher state of being and have a more healthy mind moving forward. But I got to put in the work. That's why when I said on those shows about narcissism and the narcissistic abuse that I received from several people in a short period of time, it was one of the best things that happened to me because it made me go into a state of humility to where I was like, man, I got to look at myself in the mirror and say, enough is enough. We got to do things differently. And that these people that abuse me are my master teachers teaching me something, and that the Most High allowed them to teach me what they needed to teach me and got me out of those situations that could have been very bad if they continued to exist. Like many people that have listened to the show and around the world have gone through, where they're not as fortunate as I was, where my relationship was long distance and it didn't last long because I started to see things clearly when I was fasting. Anytime I was fasting is when I would see the abuse for what it was. That's why I suggest to you, brothers and sisters, fast, because the Most High speaks through us through fasting. because we take out everything of the world and we have nothing but ourselves and our spirit. And I think that's what the Most High really, really shows us things, in my opinion. But also, because of that, a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people marry, have kids, are in these abusive relationships that are so toxic 15, 20 years. And like I mentioned in the narcissism series, spiritually, they're broken. They're completely distraught. And sometimes they never survive that. Sometimes they die with not healing. They die with that trauma being a significant hindrance in their life for many, many years, unresolved. So what I'm saying to you, brothers and sisters, is that it's very important to understand repentance. It's very important to understand the self-examination. It's very important to practice introspection, because we got to look from within instead of trying to look somewhere outside of ourselves for the answers. The answers are within. A lot of times it comes from the self-examination. And with the self-examination, then you can seek out the proper counseling. Then you can seek out the proper people. And most importantly, having the right people around you and establishing healthy relationships. Because if we don't, then the cycle keeps repeating over and over again. And then we wind up becoming a hurt person that has gone through some traumatic abuse as a child, as a teenager, or as an adult. And then as that hurt person, we take that hurt and that pain, and then we regurgitate it. We recycle it. And then we bring that pain and that hurt onto another victim, onto another prey as predators. And then we become the abuser ourselves from the abuse that we receive. And then that cycle continues. And then we become the hurt people that hurt people. So, brothers and sisters, I hope that this episode has had somewhat of an impact on your life. And I hope that you can share it with those that may are going through or have gone through or are still going through some of the things that I discussed here when it comes to mental health and having some unresolved abandonment issues, neglect issues, and really being codependent and not really having a sense of peace within themselves. So if you know somebody like that and you know somebody that's suffering from that, share this episode with them. Download the episode, support, leave a review. Let me know what you think. And of course, I'm going to be putting out some TikTok and Instagram and Twitter videos asking you, the listeners, what you want to listen to. What is it that you want me to cover for this upcoming season? Because there's going to be a lot of interviews. And in between, I want to cover the topics that you want to listen to. And I really want to serve my listeners that have been with me for these past 2 years at a higher level. So, like I mentioned, if you want a certain episode or you want to discuss certain topics, send me an email or at networkofawareness.com, or go to the website and leave a review, ask a question. It's all set up there. And also, if you'd like to donate, there is a donation tab. I would greatly appreciate it. Any donation, whether it's $1, whether it's $2, $5, it doesn't matter. Whatever you can afford or whatever it is that you feel that this platform provides for you as far as value, please donate, because we are growing and your money will be put to great use to make this platform better than what it is now. So, brothers and sisters in this truth, to all my positive people around the world, and to all my people that are not feeling so positive and are feeling a little negative and hopeless and depressed, I still love y'all, no matter what. And we're here to stay. And it's all about awareness. So when you live in the present, brothers and sisters, there's just always an opportunity for a new beginning. And last but not least, there's something else I want to mention here. And I'm going to play some of my exiting music here. I want to say to you that take this mental health issue seriously when it comes to yourself and others. Because if the mind is not right, then the spirit ain't right. Because everything is attached to the spirit. So if the spirit ain't right, if you're not repenting, if you're not taking time to look at yourself in the mirror with great humility and just ask the Most High, please make me better. Give me the strength to be better instead of bitter, then what are we doing? We're just wasting our time. And we're just being hurt people that hurt people. So this is all the informationless, saying peace, love, and light. And don't look for the light at the end of the tunnel, because the light is and always will be within you. So light up the tunnel and find your way through the darkness. Peace and blessings, Barakatah. All praise to the Most High and praise to His Son, the Messiah, Christ, Yahweh, and Yahweh. Shalom, brothers and sisters.
This concludes the Network of Awareness podcast. For more information on the Network of Awareness, please subscribe via email to our website, networkofawareness.com, and follow us on Spreaker.com or any other listening apps you use. For any questions about the NOA, email us at aura@networkofawareness.com. Thank you for listening to one of the fastest growing podcast shows on society and culture in America and abroad. When you live in the present, there's always an opportunity for a new beginning. Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings.